Welcome to Mindfulness Manufacturing. My name is Trevor Blondeel. Spending 25 years in manufacturing, I discovered the real impact we have on turnover, communication, and the ability to manage change is how we show up. That's the essence of emotional intelligence. In each episode, we bring a guest or message to expand your skills, engage your people, and grow your organization. So let's jump in. In manufacturing, how we present our ideas can have a huge impact on the outcome. And often it's our mindset, not so much our words, but that mindset may affect our words. And it reminds me of watching a quality manager present out to his general manager and using that 4-letter word, the one that starts with H, hope. And I could see the facial expressions in the room when the quality manager hoped that the containment plan would work for the client and the customer. And yeah, I remember the meeting stopped and they talked about that. And in my journey here, I met an author from Bulletproof Selling, former Marine, who is helping replace this word hope with certainty and just rewriting the rules. Shawn Rhodes has been featured in Time, Wall Street Journal, CNN, NBC, Forbes, and he's one of the industry's top sales experts. And I got him on the show today to help me understand this. Welcome, Shawn.
It's my pleasure, sir. Thanks for having me on.
So when I first got to know you, Shawn, you caught me right away because you had this whole deeper mindset around. I thought about the hope, and it reminded me of that. But when I hear the word hope or try, it does catch me, right? And it changes my mindset when I'm talking to someone. How did you get fixated on this hope and attracted me so much and created so much curiosity about you?
It was before I ever got into business, before I ever worked with any manufacturers. I was actually on the battlefield that I saw this play out first. As a U.S. Marine, I was embedded with these teams, highest performers in the military. I had kind of a weird job in that way. So I'm alongside Marine Corps snipers, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, folks that are running around on the battlefield in the desert doing what they do. And I realized that their environment changed so quickly. If they waited for their environment to change before they did, if they simply hoped that things worked out or hoped they'd figure it out along the way, not only was it mission failure, but they probably weren't all going to be coming home. So I realized these men and women were fanatical about identifying where hope was entering their plans and replacing it. And we can talk about what they replaced it with, but that's really where hope, and I saw it play out poorly, and I saw these men and women were just beasts about removing hope from how they operated. And then you fast forward a decade or two, and I'm in business, and I see the highest performers in business, the highest performers in sales. They may not say it, but they're not operating from hope either. And how we know that is if you study them, you watch them how they lead their teams, you watch them how they negotiate a sales contract. They're using the same process again and again and again. One they've probably developed on their own or that they've learned from somebody else, but it gets rubber stamped again and again and again with minor variations depending on who they're dealing with or the business that they're in. So if we can remove hope from how we sell, because I've really talked to a lot of salespeople, but we definitely apply this into operations. You can remove hope from how you serve. And as a leader, you should be chiefly concerned with service. So if you want to serve more, if you want to sell more in your organization, if you want to sell your ideas more, to what you mentioned in your introduction, removing hope is a good place to start.
It's amazing that there's so many ideas around someone that's progressing their career in manufacturing and just being a little more mindful of like you can just stop listening to podcasts now and just implement this. Like, just remember, don't say the 4-letter word in front of other people,
Yeah.
And then if you're thinking it, I mean, that's another internal cue, right? If you're like, man, I hope this works out. Like, I hope we don't shut the customer down. I hope this doesn't break down. It's a trigger to say, okay, so what else do I need to do? So when you're helping people get this hope out of their mind and it slips in maybe before they say it. So what are we doing with that information?
How are we training people to not hope, you mean?
Yeah, like, so if I'm getting it, like if I'm just all of a sudden, I'm starting to think it. I haven't said it yet, but I'm like, man, I hope this is going to work out. Like for my mind,
okay, well,
I'm starting to think, man, what do I need to do different?
I actually have some leaders do this. They'll print this out in big letters, or they'll create a poster out of it, and it just says, hope is not a strategy. And so it's really coming from this mindset that as leaders, we're the ones responsible for planning and oftentimes executing strategy. If hope is factoring into that, there are so many things that could go wrong between development of that strategy, implementation, execution, monitoring it, tracking it, making it better. If hope factors in at all, really, then you have an opportunity for this to go off the rails. And in manufacturing, not only are you dealing with issues that are really important, like safety. I know none of us would just simply hope people don't make mistakes on the shop floor that cause them to be permanently injured. But we also have hope enter in with our customers. Hope this gets delivered on time.
Yeah.
I thought we had enough drivers on shift, but it turns out a couple of them called out sick, and now we just got stuff sitting on the lot waiting to go out. That's not good. So if we identify, and this doesn't have to be an overnight process, by the way, a lot of us are over reliant on hope, and we can move away from it gradually. Really comes from identifying what are the things that could go wrong, and how can we mitigate those problems or eliminate them entirely. And we can walk through ways I've seen great manufacturing leaders do that. But it absolutely comes down to what we call in sales smoking hopium, where we're just hoping things work out, hoping those sales close, hoping that operations continue at the clip they're at, hoping our shifts continue to produce the amount of stuff we need them to produce to the quality we need them to produce it at. If hope is factoring in there, you will be let down, unfortunately. And when you let yourself down as a leader, inevitably you're letting your people down too.
In a time in my career, I was responsible for bringing in parts for the Ford Motor Company. And I was early in my career, and I did way too much hoping. And I remember my boss sitting me down and just saying, hey, your only stress is it comes from what you don't plan for. And my mindset was, well, if everything works out, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
As long as there's no flat tires, nobody gets in the way, that there's no accidents. And, I just started he changed my mindset. Like, I'll never forget that moment, right? Because it was kind of like, oh, okay, so yeah, my stress is coming because I'm hoping, and I'm not really thinking of like, what else can I put in place? So if I have that, if I don't have that buffer on the transportation, what's another driver backup? Like you said, if a driver calls in, what can we do that? So is that really a lot of the work that you're doing, Shawn, is just kind of helping people kind of like train their mindset so that that's automatically coming to them when they start feeling that way? I can put a backup plan in.
Skill set absolutely begins with mindset, and then you have to put it into practice. And the reason that a lot of people, I find, don't plan in the way that they should by removing hope, and how you do that is definitely a specific type of planning process. It's because they either don't know how, or they don't think they have the time to do it. And so we can address each of those in turn. How not, if you say you don't know how to remove hope from how you operate, hey, well, that's why you're listening to this podcast, right? Yeah. So you can get that information from you, can get that information from me. You can read books, do all the things. So the excuse if I don't know isn't really an excuse anymore. You're just hoping that things don't go wrong. The other piece of it is I don't have the time. I'm too busy leading. I have all these HR issues I've got to deal with. I've got to hire. We've got, attrition that's way too high from our shifts and on our facilities.
Yes.
You got a lot of things you've got to manage. If you would like to deal with less of those issues, think about all the fires you have to put out. What removing hope from your operations allows you to do is those fires will still crop up, but I'm going to give you the tools to take away the matchbook that is setting all of the fires. Because if all you're doing is putting out the fires as they're set, you're not preventing the fire from happening again. You're not preventing that little ember from then blasting into a smoldering blaze, but you're also not stopping the next fire from being started. What removing hope from how you operate allows you to actually do is get ahead of the rate of change, because you're taking small changes now, bite-sized chunks of change, changing the way you operate, changing the way you're planning for a shift not showing up at all. How do you deal with the after effects of that? How do you deal with an economic recession? How do you deal with the changes that are going to happen in the election that's coming up in the U.S. this year? You can plan for all these things. You may not be able to eliminate them, but if you create the small change now and do that again tomorrow and again the next day and again the next week, over the course of time, you will have eliminated most of the fires that you spend most of your time putting out. Think of the resources that frees up for you as a leader to plan, to adjust strategy, to pivot, so that when those big changes do happen that we can't anticipate, you'll be able to marshal all your resources against them rather than figure out how you squeeze 10% more out of your people that are already overtaxed, overworked, and dealing with the same challenges today that they were dealing with last year.
Yeah, that isn't a servant mindset if you're just trying to get 10% more out of your people, or just say, hey, we just need to keep our eye on quality a little bit more today and try a little bit harder. That's like the worst morning mantra you can have, in my opinion. Where it's kind of like, okay, so what's annoying you today? What's getting in your way? What's that fire? So like, if that's coming, what can I do to get in front of that? How do I best, like you talk about servant of how do I put something in place so that if I know that, for example, that the tips are going to have to be changed on the welding robots. So like, if I know that's coming, how am I getting in front of that? How am I not hoping that they're going to last and I don't get bad welds, but like, if I know this, what's the right number to do that? And that's something that reminds me of some of the headaches that we've lived through and learned of, okay, we don't have to hope that the tips are going to last. We know now, we spare parts, downtime, all those aspects. And I love the whole fact of when you're in the battlefield, I don't want to be with someone that's hoping.
Yeah. It doesn't work out well for anybody.
But it's the same thing. Like when you're working and you're providing for your family and you want to be in a growth company, you want to be surrounded with people that aren't hoping as well.
Yeah. Yeah. You want people that are taking the initiative on change, that are not hoping they remember everything that they've learned. I'd much rather be a part of a company that has a high performance culture. And what creates that are not just individuals that are motivated, it's the culture, the systems, the processes that are in place. So that even as a junior person in your organization, I know I'm stepping into a lot of well-established processes that are going to hold me to a high level and allow me to know if I'm getting off course long before I screw up an entire order that then upsets everybody else on my shift. It upsets my manager. It upsets the customer. Please save me from that long before it happens. That's the type of mentality I want my people to have. And you can create that if you just make sure you are, again, not hoping. And that comes from the tactics of capturing what's working and eliminating what isn't, so that you can create those small changes and make sure you're not suffering from the same mistakes again and again and again.
Makes me think of maintenance planning, like just the wear on certain equipment. How long is it going to go out? Can we get in front of replacing that? Can we predict that and put something? When I read your book, that's really what it made me think a lot of, like in my own business. What's the system that I need to put in place so I'm not hoping that next year is going to be good? How can I put something in a little bit more that's repeatable? So because you had such great training in the Marines, what was described to me, like, is there a story, or what was it like when you kind of went into some organizations, you got in the civilian world, and it's kind of like, oh my gosh, like there must have been a little bit of like, how do we operate like this?
It was a little whiplash. I mean, obviously in the Marine Corps, especially in a deployed environment in combat, one mistake means someone isn't coming home. Like those are the stakes that we're dealing with. So we made really sure that those mistakes didn't get made. And that meant we had to be well trained. We had to know how to operate the equipment that we were operating, because all of it was dangerous. And if it wasn't dangerous, we could make it dangerous, because, leave a bunch of Marines to their own devices and they'll figure out a way to make a fluffy stuffed animal dangerous. That's what we do. And so we had all these things going on. Now, combine that with the fact that we were never operating at peak capacity either. As athletic as we were and all the physical training we were given and the combat training and everything, we might have gotten 3 hours of sleep in a given night, stack that up week over week, and nobody is feeling at 100% because that's our operational tempo. We're out running missions all the time. And so with all of these things happening, dangerous environment, we're not operating at peak performance, and OSHA rep would have a field day with the Marine Corps, let me tell you, just what we do in general as part of our mission set. Yeah. All these things going on meant that we had to have the training that would protect us from our own mistakes, our own incompetence, in the battlefield changing every minute as well. And how we created that training, you mentioned the maintenance plans you have. We got to train people in how to use them. You could take something that's static like a maintenance plan and apply it to other areas of a manufacturing organization. But an element that I would layer on top of that is to make sure that you're taking the time to improve your training, to make sure it's relevant. A machine is pretty static, but the amount of equipment that you put through it, the amount of orders that you would put under that machine to have the work done on it, that might change. And that's going to change your maintenance plan. It's going to change the operators that you have working it. Business is the same way. If we don't take the time to periodically stop and assess what's working and what isn't, we'll never be able to make those small adjustments. And those adjustments could absolutely be to our maintenance. They could be to our safety. They could be to our leadership. They could be to our next couple of new hires, depending on what positions we need to fill. So we absolutely need to make sure we're monitoring the battlefield, so to speak, so that the changes we do make keep our organization, our systems, and our processes relevant. And I feel like that was something that we had to do every day on the battlefield because it was a dynamic environment. Our enemy always got a vote in our plan, which meant we couldn't wait for the enemy to make that decision that we then reacted against, because we'd always be a step behind. It would be very dangerous. So we had to make sure we were the ones taking the initiative on action. And you can absolutely do that as a leader in manufacturing.
Yeah. Like even just like if you're driving to work right now and you're thinking, man, I hope we're going to hit target today. Like, what can you ask your crew, maybe even at the shift kickoff, right? If we're going to hit target today, what happens? Like, what needs to happen? And then all of a sudden, if you can start creating some of that dialogue with your team and maybe even catch that word. If you catch someone, I hope we're going to have a good day. And I say, say more on that. So what would make it, if you weren't hoping, what would need to happen? Is that something that you would try to use, Shawn?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'd say, it's very military oriented. I wouldn't maybe use the term mission objective, but
Yeah.
what's the objective? Today's shift. What is our objective? It's to produce this many widgets at this level of quality with
Hmm.
100% successful safety record, whatever that is for you. You know what your own objectives need to be for that. If that's our objective, then I would ask the team, all right, well, what could stand in the way of that success? What are the top 3 or 4 things that could potentially go wrong or that have gone wrong that have prevented us from being able to reach that objective in the past? And you could do this at your morning kickoff meeting. And
Yeah.
people are going to give you responses like, well, Bob got hurt 3 years ago because he put his hand under the press at the wrong time. Another thing that could go wrong, not everybody might show up, or the power could go out, or, just think of all the things that have possibly gotten in the way of that in the past. And then you don't have to eliminate them, but develop a really quick contingency plan for if that happens, what do we do about it?
Yeah.
It still allows us to get as close to that mission objective as possible. And at least that gets everybody's mind in the right frame. Because I'm going to tell you, the worst time to try to figure out a contingency is in the middle of a crisis.
And that reminds me of I love how you kind of pull it back to as a Marine and serving, you're protecting other people's lives and the freedom of a country. And in manufacturing, we're making parts and we want to make sure as a priority, everybody goes home the same.
Yeah.
So I love the whole tie into safety. And if we could just focus, because if you're not treating safety, and if you haven't taken the 4-letter word out of safety, then it's not going to work in operations. So you really got to kind of have that whole first mindset of, because it's interesting. I go to so many different plants and there's different safety records, and it can tell it's so behavior based. It's mindset based. And I've heard people say before, well, it's manufacturing, man. People are going to get hurt. It's kind of like, well, that's kind of like saying that, hey, we're going to lose a couple of Marines. Like, no, you don't ever have the mindset, right? You don't think you're going to lose your person or someone's going to go home hurt. So otherwise, then the whole system would break down. So I think that's just good for listeners right now too, right? If you're thinking about your safety is there anybody out there in your plant hoping not to get hurt? Well, you need to have a conversation with them and figure out what takes that hope away. And because I like the phrase of love and hope just isn't enough.
Yeah. They serve very valuable functions in life, but we should not be applying hope to how we execute. Have faith, have hope in a better tomorrow and a good day. I absolutely have, faith in a lot of areas of my life that I didn't before the Marine Corps. So I get to see a lot of the world and see the good and the bad in it.
Yeah.
But as I execute against my business, as I work with my clients, hope it doesn't really get us where we need to go.
And so what's the difference then with faith?
So faith ties in something larger than you, a type of mission for your life. Why are you here on Earth? And I know you like diving a little deeper with your guest than the average podcast host, so we can get into this topic as well.
Absolutely.
I often ask myself, what is the purpose of people in life, in business? And I've come to the universal conclusion that it's not to sell more stuff. It's not to achieve a certain safety record. It's not to produce what you produce at a certain quality level or in a certain volume. I'm very convinced that the purpose in life, and I talk to sales teams a lot for this, I say, you will not be judged at the end of your days on whether you sold as much as Jeff Bezos. Nobody cares. What they do care about, how you will be judged by your creator, by your family, by your community, is did you show up as fully as you could in your role as a father, as a wife, as a husband, as an aunt, stepbrother, stepsister, plant manager, shift manager, all the things, all the roles that you might have. Did you activate all of your potential? And that's really my greatest fear at the end of my life, is not that I, didn't make $1 million and, didn't figure out how to own 4 beach houses. It's that I didn't live up to the potential that was put within me. So every day I'm on a mission to activate more of that potential, to bring more of it to the table for myself, my family, my clients, my community, and my country. And as a leader in your organization, if you're listening to this, I'm making the assumption that you are a leader. Your chief concern, like what should keep you up at night, is did I show up as fully as I could have in all of the roles that I serve in my life? Because if you show up fully, I'm convinced that things will work out for you in the way that they need to work out for you to then step up tomorrow. This is a never-ending journey, by the way, to activate more of your potential. Nobody fell up a mountain, right? If you're climbing that mountain, you're trying to get better every day. You're not going to stumble up it. You have to climb it. And that means every day recommitting yourself to how can I show up more fully? How can I activate more of my potential? That's the faith that I have to have, that mission is the right one for me, that I'm supposed to be on. Because otherwise I'd just be pouring money into creating revenue as quickly as possible. And that's fun, but probably not why I'm here on Earth.
No.
I'd rather be that person that brought myself more fully to my roles every single day. And out of that, I'm known as someone that was dedicated to service rather than just to selling.
Yeah, what are you remembered for? And having that North Star of your own faith and hey, we're everyone here has a gift to give. And
Mm-hmm.
are we focused on that? And you make me reflect a lot, just like a lot of changes I've gone through personally, right? And in the last couple of years of it's just changed my whole mindset. And it's I'm 8 years in business and still trying to figure it out, Shawn. And the fact of like changing the company name now to Manufacturing Greatness, having kind of that higher responsibility of like, I don't want to see plants that people are getting hurt and they're not connected from the top of the shop. And you can just see the behaviors aren't there, and we are hoping, but we don't have to hope. Like there are systems that can take that hope away. I love that difference between faith and hope. That helps me, as I'm sure it'll be helping some listeners. So when we are in the operations, what are some things that we can do to help eliminate more of this hope, Shawn?
So I take the time to take the initiative on change. And this is a system. It's a process. In the military, I figured out, these men and women were dedicated fanatically to removing hope and replacing it. And what they replaced it with were systems we used in training, systems we used in operating. And so if you are finishing up a shift, you have a kickoff session. Can you spare 10 minutes at the end of your shift to bring everybody back together and figure out how to make the next one even better than this one? And you can determine what better looks like. It might be a safety record, production numbers, might be enjoyment, culture. You define that for yourself. But take the time at the end of it to ask 3 simple questions. And you can do this for sales. You can do it for operations. Do it for any area of your company. The first question, and this is modeled directly after the debriefs that we ran after every single combat mission. First question to ask is, for everybody on the team, everybody on your shift, if you had to run that entire shift over again from start time to end time, what would each of you have done differently? Not would you do something differently, but what would you have done differently? And this is extreme ownership, just like Jocko Willink talks about. Whether you've been on a job for a day or 30 years, I don't care. There's room for improvement. So what could you have done differently? And as a leader, it's really impactful if you're the first one to give a response to that. If you're the shift leader or the plant manager and you're running this, here's what I could have done differently as your leader. I could have better monitored this. I could have brought you more resources here. I could have made sure that we didn't run out of supplies there, whatever that looks like. And to give your people the permission then to be vulnerable as well. Now, out of this, next question to ask is, all right, knowing how that shift went from beginning to end, what do we wish we would have known about what happened to us? In sales, I phrase this a little differently. I say, what do we wish we would have known about our prospect before we stepped into that conversation? But if you're manufacturing something, you're on the line.
Yeah.
We've assessed it now. What do we wish we would have known given what happened to us? The power went out. Bob got hurt. Sally stepped in at the last minute and had to, correct something that was going wacky with quality, whatever that looks like. What would we have done differently knowing how that played out? What could we have done to stop it earlier or deal with it sooner so we didn't have to shut down the entire line for 5 minutes or 5 hours? And the final question is, knowing how that shift went, what could your organization, your company, your plant have provided to you that would have made a difference? And that might look like training. It might look like upgraded equipment. It might look like better maintained equipment. It might look like a better process for you to get raw materials to the beginning of your line. You can start asking these questions and answering them. So out of this, you can then decide, all right, from the answers to these 3 questions, what could we do differently next time? Well, now we've got some great responses. How are we going to put them into action? And who's going to be accountable to making sure that they are put into action? So this isn't just something we're talking about, but rather it's something that we are creating change with. And by doing that, after every shift, you don't have to put everything there, but push it up to your shift managers, push it up to your plant manager, your factory manager. Let them make the call. You have 10 great ideas every day coming from these kind of shift end debriefs. They're responsible for making sure that one new thing gets implemented. And maybe it always has to do with safety first until we run out of things to implement for safety. Now we step into quality and then we step into volume. Keep running like that. And when those big changes do happen in the economy or with your customers, think of all the things that you'll have solved along the way. So those won't be the things that hold you back from being able to deal with those big changes that we can't anticipate.
You should have been at some of our Friday meetings, we called them, right? We would walk around the plant, we go to different areas. And I remember the president kind of going around and listening to some of the presentations and just the emotion when the presenter would be like, we had this catastrophic breakdown on the press. We lost this cylinder. It was a major failure. We're going to be good for that for a long time. So, that shouldn't happen again next week. So we're going to have a better week. It was like, no one ever applauded.
No.
Like, okay, so we're going to hope that we don't get a different catastrophe. And then the next week will be like, okay, but this, you couldn't believe it that this happened this week. But what great 3 questions to ask. And it kind of ties back to like having that bigger vision, what you said, Shawn, of is it worth it to shut down for 10 minutes and have each person speak for 30 seconds or a minute on what they could have done different? What can we get in front of? And it's really having that mindset to serve and not just get a few more parts out at the end of the day, and having some courage, because that's a risk, man, because it's really hard when you're in operations. It's hard to shut down the line and have a conversation like that. And sometimes just if you do that, even without permission, sometimes it's worth that risk, right? Of just saying, hey, I know if I can get these 10 people together, they're going to have ideas and I'll make up those numbers tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. And those ideas will probably save you the time and money that it would have otherwise cost you. So that's also something to keep in mind. You don't have the time not to do this, is the way that I think about it. Because if it worked for us on the battlefield, bullets and mortars and rockets and stuff flying around, probably is going to work for you as well. If it kept us alive, it might keep your people more successful too.
Yeah, I just love how you've tied in those experiences, because there's a lot of people like myself, Shawn, and I'm grateful for you serving so that I've been able to have freedom. And I think it's been helpful following Jocko Willink. I do like his phrase, and you and I talked about this discipline equals freedom.
Yeah.
And if you have the discipline in any part of your life, like, it is freedom. And I've been saying that lately, copying it from him. And then it kind of makes me feel good, right? Because it's kind of like, okay, I know if I do these things, I know if I take these actions, if I do go to bed at that certain time, if I book out an hour tomorrow to practice my speech or make those phone calls, I got faith that the outcome's going to be good. And I'm not hoping that someone's going to call me to speak tomorrow or hire me, because we've got a consistent podcast. We reach out to people regularly, and we're there to add value, right? And add value to those people that are coming in and their personal mission, rather than just, hey, make sure you keep loading those parts.
Yeah, and for your listeners, I mean, I'd say to ask the question at the end of the day, did I do everything that I could to make this day the best that I could? And that's another discipline equals freedom type of concept. And now you could say that and say, well, I was really busy all day. I did a lot of stuff. Okay, where's the proof? If we were going to look forensically at what you did throughout the day and what changes you've made and what changes are going to last on your team and on, your own personal life, would you be able to be convicted of that in a court of law? Is there evidence? So at the end of the day, end of a shift, is there evidence that you captured what was working and made steps to eliminate what doesn't?
Man.
And if you can do that, you will be irreplaceable in your facility, because no one else is doing this. No one else is capturing it, especially outside their heads, in a way that benefits every shift and every team. But if you're the one that does it, success will find you.
Oh, that is, we're wrapping up here, but man, that is powerful. Because I'm just thinking to myself, like, holy crap, if I really start thinking to myself, like, in a court of law, if I said, I'm going to do this, and my freedom is dependent upon that, how am I going to treat that? Because I got a couple items that fell off my calendar yesterday, and it's like, okay, you're making choices, right? You said this was important, and you didn't do it, and that's not freedom, because I don't feel free when I didn't accomplish those goals. And it's like, if you can keep that on the front of your mind, and I like what you said, whether you got a sticker in front of you. I've started just this last couple of weeks in my journal in the mornings, I'm writing down just 3 main objectives. Like, these are the high levels that I just got to hit today. And then I relook at my journal during the day, because I'm like, okay, what was my main thing? Because Shawn called, and then my son called, and then I had this issue with the internet company that was down, and all of a sudden, oh, hold on a minute, Shawn, when the listeners talk about Shawn Rhodes, what do you want to leave them with? What are they saying when they're thinking about your message?
I'd say the number one thing is that success is not determined in life by how much you sell, whether you're selling products or ideas or culture. It's determined by how much you serve. So you get to define for yourself what service looks like for you and be able to prove it at the end of the day, so that you can point to things and say, here's exactly how I served, and here's the evidence of that. So instead of it just being a warm fuzzy, I know a lot of manufacturers aren't keen on warm fuzzies. They want proof. They want objective reality. Create the objective reality for yourself, so that you can point back to it and say, that's how I made a difference. That's how I brought my full potential to the table.
I like the fact that you get to decide. I like that part, right? Like, this is not someone telling you what you got to do. This is like, you get to decide, and it's your commitment to yourself. I love that. So I've learned through some of your videos, Shawn, and working with you and reading your book, and just conversations, I've just taken so many different ideas away, and just have so much respect for you, just in the fact of like how you went through the Marines and how you've tied that in. And so for our listeners, and your company's called Bulletproof Selling, but you do a lot of stocks to manufacturers and in operations as well.
Oh, yeah.
People best follow you, learn more about you.
Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, Shawn Rhodes, Chief Sales Sergeant of Bulletproof Selling. And on the operations side, the very first book I ever wrote was all about operational improvement. It's called Pivot Point, Turn on a Dime Without Sacrificing Results. You can get that on Amazon. And if you have a sales team at your facility or in your company, please point them over to bulletproofselling.us or our book, Bulletproof Selling, on Amazon, Kindle, and Audible.
All right. And a great voice on the Audible.
Thanks.
I loved that. Thanks so much for coming on, Shawn.
Hey folks, appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Haven't subscribed yet? Do it now. Remember, if you want results, the key is increasing your awareness of how you show up.